today's first topic would be the shapes of recovery. Shapes of recovery. We talked about this business cycle, right? We talked about the business cycle, wherein I have created a cycle like this in which I told you that this is a growing economy, this is the peak or boom, this is the slowdown, this is a recession, and this is a depression. Fine. Now, because of the COVID, because of the COVID impact, and because of the COVID, government had to go in for lockdowns. Government had to go in for lockdowns. अब लॉकडाउन बंद हो गया. लॉकडाउन की वजह से व्हाट हैपन? लॉकडाउन की वजह से प्रोडक्शन वाज डिस्टर्ब्ड इन द इकोनॉमी. प्रोडक्शन वाज डिस्टर्ब्ड, यानी प्रोडक्शन नहीं हो पा रहा था. When you are not able to produce, will you be able to supply? No, you'll not be able to supply. We call it a supply side constraint. We call it a supply side constraint. So what are we seeing? We are seeing that because of the lockdown, because the continuous lockdowns and the very strict lockdowns put in by the government of India, because of that, laborers were not able to go to the factories, and factories were not able to function, and production was halted. And when there is no production, there will be no supply. There will be a supply side constraint. And when there is no supply, there is no production. How will we create our GDP? So GDP started to contract, and our growth became negative. तो आपने लॉकडाउन लगाया, प्रोडक्शन रुक गई, प्रोडक्शन से सप्लाई नहीं होगा. जब सप्लाई नहीं होगा, क्योंकि आप प्रोड्यूस नहीं कर रहे हो, जीडीपी विल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, जीडीपी कम होगा. और जब जीडीपी कम होगा, ग्रोथ अपने आप नीचे आ जाएगा. और ग्रोथ नीचे आते 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 वी प्लंज डाउन टू -24%. इतना नीचे आ गया. And then we recovered for some time, and we were down there in the minus for consecutive 2 quarters. Yani India was in a technical recession because of the lockdown. -24%, and there was 11%, there was 7%. So India thoda recessionary period mein chala gaya. Now, when you are down at the bottom, you have to recover, right? You have to recover. आपको recover करना है. अब recovery कैसे की जाए? What kind of recovery would India follow? Now, these are the various shapes of recoveries. कि कैसा recovery हो सकता है इंडिया का? Why is it important? Because Economic Survey 2020 talked about these shapes of recoveries. Fine. Now we'll have to understand what are the various shapes of recoveries. कि जब आप नीचे हैं, how can you recover? For that, there are various shapes. The first would be the Z-shaped recovery. The Z-shaped recovery. Okay? Z-shaped recovery क्या है? Let me draw the graph. So you have to have a graph like this. On the x-axis, there is time. On the y-axis, there is GDP. Okay, there is GDP. So GDP कभी भी zero नहीं हो सकता. Let's say this is 0. GDP can never be 0. That means GDP has to have always a positive value, because we can never say that economy has stopped producing altogether. Then that will be the death of the economy altogether. GDP can never be 0. GDP is always positive. So GDP starts from a positive value. Let's say this was 10 lakh crore, 20 lakh crore, 100 lakh crore, 200 lakh crore. Now this is the particular GDP value. Now in the long term, that is when you see the time, and this is the time, in the long term, GDP always has this trajectory. यानी GDP long term में हमेशा बढ़ता है. When you talk about the time, GDP long term में हमेशा बढ़ता है. This is known as growth trend line. This is known as growth trend line. So in the long term, we'll have this steady increase in the GDP. ये तो होगा. Now let's say this was the year, somewhere between, this is the year 2020, and sometime between, what we saw is India, which was moving in this growth trend line. India was moving in this growth trend line. So this is India. India was moving, and at one point, because of the COVID, Indian GDP started to contract. Indian GDP started to contract. नीचे आ गया. So growth became negative. Fine. If it started to contract into negative -24%, then what is a Z-shaped recovery? Z-shaped recovery tells us that when you're down at the bottom, it will be such a recovery, it will be such a huge recovery that you will be able to recover too fast and even above the normal growth trend line. आप नॉर्मल ग्रोथ ट्रेंड लाइन के भी ऊपर चले जाओगे, इतना आप जल्दी से ग्रो करोगे. Then slowly and gradually, after some time, you will come back to your original growth trend line. So this becomes your Z-shaped recovery curve. This is a Z-shaped recovery curve. So this kind of a recovery curve is the most optimistic scenario. It is the most optimistic scenario in which the economy quickly rises back. So this is your Z-shaped recovery curve. Let's have another shaped recovery. Number 2, which is the V-shaped recovery. V-shaped recovery. V-shaped recovery may be, you need to have a normal growth trend line. And V-shaped recovery tells us when, because of the COVID impact, when you go down at the bottom and then you rise up again to the normal growth trend line. So that is a V-shaped recovery. Fine. So V-shaped recovery is the next best scenario. It is the next best scenario. It is the next best scenario in which the economy quickly recoups lost ground and gets back to the normal growth trend line. So that would be your V-shaped recovery. The next one is U-shaped recovery. U-shaped recovery. So U-shape kya hai? U-shape is like this. When you're going down to recession, going down to slow down, you're going down. After you go down, you don't immediately go up, but you spend some time in the recession and then slowly and gradually you come up. So that becomes a U-shaped recovery. It takes a longer time to come up. It takes a longer time to come up again to the normal growth trend line. So that becomes a U-shaped recovery. So U-shaped recovery is a scenario in which the economy, after falling, struggles and muddles around a low growth rate for some time before rising gradually to usual levels. So that is your U-shaped recovery. Okay. Another one is W-shaped recovery. So W-shaped recovery kya hai? You go down, then you recover quickly. But when you are recovering, let's say after the first lockdown was imposed, after the first wave of COVID, India was trying to recover, and immediately the second wave hit India, and India had to import a second lockdown, and we got back down again, and then we are trying to recover. So that became a W-shaped recovery. Okay, W-shaped recovery. So W-shaped recovery, in this growth falls and rises. Growth falls and rises, but falls again before recovering yet again, thus forming a W-like chart. That is your W-shaped recovery. After that, we have L-shaped recovery. L-shaped recovery. So L-shape kya hai? You go down, and then you stay there. आप वापस आते ही नहीं हो. That is one of the most, difficult situations an economy can be in. That you be there for a long period of time. You are not able to recover at all. That is an L-shaped recovery. L-shaped recovery. So L-shaped recovery is the worst case scenario in which growth after falling stagnates at low levels and does not recover for a long time. After that, we have J-shaped recovery. J-shaped recovery क्या है? J-shaped recovery is like this, that when you're going down, then you immediately go up and you reach to another level wherein you stay there then. कि आप एक अलग ही लेवल पे पहुंच जाते हो. Fine. That means even better than before and far better than before. Such kind of a system, such kind of a recovery is a hypothetical scenario. As it is not seen anywhere. So that is an unrealistic scenario. कि ऐसा भी हो सकता है. So it is an unrealistic scenario. Unrealistic scenario in which growth rises sharply from the lows much higher than the trend line, much higher than the trend line, and stays there. The last one is the K-shaped recovery. K-shaped recovery क्या है? Now India is moving because of the lockdown. After some time, you see that there is a part of India that is having a higher and higher growth. A part of India that is having a higher and higher growth. And then there is another part that is actually going down to depression. So India is getting divided into two Indias, wherein one is recovering to a level wherein, like people like Adani and Ambani, they are now more than Adani has now more than $100 billion valuation. It happened because of the COVID period only. So they have increased to a levels unimaginable before. And there is another part of India, the rest of India, which is down at the bottom. So such kind of a recovery is a K-shaped recovery, wherein there is huge inequalities in the nation. There is a huge bridge between the rich and the poor. Fine. So that is a kind of K-shaped recovery, which we have seen in India because of the COVID. So it is a bifurcation. It is the bifurcation of recovery, where those at the top are seeing things go up, at the middle. Those at the middle and below are seeing things go down, and get worse. For example, Indian stock market being healthy while many lost their jobs. So this is a K-shaped recovery.